She didn't want to tell people this, and you know that. You watched her on the stand. It was heart-rending for her to have to do this with the cameras, no less. But what else is false about this statement? It's that there was no false statements of sexual violence. Ben went through all four of them, and I will not repeat them all. You heard the testimony, and interestingly enough, you didn't hear any stories that differed from that with Mr. Depp. He didn't get on the stand and say, you know, no, this didn't happen, to at least a couple of them. And he can't in Australia. He can't remember anything, likely. But if you just look at the pictures of the destruction in that house, I mean, imagine
all the destruction,
those canvases, and how long that took, how much hatred and rage you have to have for somebody to do something like that.
Objection,
walls,
speculation.
Carrying up her nightgown and wrapping pieces of raw steak and putting it all over the house. Remember that she also testified that he took her clothes and swiped them through all the paint before she left. You know these things happened.
You know.
With respect to the malice on this one, you know he knows that he did these things. You know that he knows he was out of it for 3 days. And that's all that we need to prove for malice. But there's a couple of more facts here. But you can find whatever Mr. Waldman's done, and you can find whatever Mr. Depp has done. And both of those are the same for purposes of evaluating the verdict form. They stand in each other's shoes. When you have an agent, and that's what the jury instructions say, you can go with both. What did Mr. Waldman do? There was an article about the sexual violence that he had put from the April one that went into the trial. Amber's testimony, she was sitting near him in the trial. Adam Waldman threw that newspaper down in front of her defiantly. That's actual malice. And she was quite upset, and you heard her testimony on the stand about that. He was just inflicting it on her. Remember Bruce Whitkin's testimony. This was Johnny Depp's best friend for 40 years until he testified truthfully 4 years ago about the drugs and alcohol, and he stopped talking to him. There was a couple of really important things that Bruce Whitkin said. One of the things he said, he met Adam Waldman once. Adam Waldman said, "Do you have any dirt on the Mandels?" And he said no, and that was it. Then he didn't care. He is an attack dog. All he wants to do is attack and put dirt on people. The second thing that Whitkin said that I think was pretty instructive was that Johnny Depp has deep-seated anger issues that have nothing to do with Amber. He remembered even back when Johnny was married to his sister-in-law, he had extreme jealousy even back then. And I think that's pretty significant. Remember, Mr. Whitkin also was called in a few times to intercede in some of these fights between Johnny and Amber when he would become so angry. The last thing I thought he said that was actually pretty important was that Kipper and his whole group are a scam. He said, you know, how is it that they can be sober doctors, you know, for these years, and he's never sober. You know, he's even taking pot all the time. How can you be sober? I thought that was quite instructive. But in any event, going back to, that's the first statement. The second statement, Michelle, if you can bring that one up. Oh, before I go there, I want to talk about a few more things from Mr. Waldman that you have in your pocket to be able to find additional malice with him. Remember, he's the one that after the UK trial went to the LAPD with a notebook full of things and tried to get perjury charges against Amber. The LAPD said, we don't investigate those things. But he then went to a German newspaper and said, Amber is being investigated by the NYPD, or the LAPD, for perjury. Do you remember that? That's malice. That's showing his intent to do harm to Amber. He also admitted that he speaks to that umbrella guy, and you'll see that one text in there from the person from TMZ. That umbrella guy is the big lead of Johnny Depp's, you know, positive social media that is putting all the negative out on Amber Heard. And he also ended up getting knocked out of Twitter because he was abusing Amber. So now we'll go to the second counterclaim statement. And that is quite simply, this was an ambush, a hoax. They set Mr. Depp up by calling the cops, but the first attempts didn't do the trick. The officers came to the penthouses, thoroughly searched and interviewed, and left after seeing no damage to face or property. So Amber and her friends spilled a little wine, roughed the place up, got their story straight under the direction of a lawyer and publicist, then placed a second call to 911. Now this is May 21. Now the clear implication here is that they're saying that Amber got together with her friends. They decided they were going to set Johnny up to be charged for domestic violence. And so they called the police, and they tried to make up this whole story, get him arrested, but the police said there's no evidence here, and went away, and they said, darn. And so they spilled wine, and they busted up the place, and they called 911. They got advice from a lawyer and a publicist, called 911, and tried again to get Johnny charged. That's what this says. Now, we all know that's false, and it's heinously false. Because, after these events happened, and Ben talked about a little bit of it, but I'll talk about the rest of it, and I'm going to try to do it really quickly. But we all know Amber did everything in her power not to tell them who Johnny was, not to press charges, not to have him arrested. The exact opposite of this. But what were the facts of May 21st? He comes over. He's already been drinking. He's already high. And he is on a tear about feces in the bed from a month ago. And remember how Amber talked about when he gets into these drug-induced things, he gets into these paranoias, and he gets some idea in his head, and he just won't let it go. And that was his this time. There's somebody put that feces in the bed a month ago. That was his spin. So she gets Io Tillett on the phone. He's in New York at the time. He's going, they thought, this is ridiculous. Of course nobody did. And by the way, Boo has this huge problem. Of course it was Boo. He's always doing this. But Johnny just won't get there. So then they laugh. That makes him mad. Then he throws the phone at Amber. Amber screams out and says, ow, you just threw the cell phone at me. It hurts. Io says, Amber, get out of there. Johnny gets madder, pulls her hair, grabs her and starts hitting her. So Io gets hold of Rocky Pennington. She comes over as quickly as she can. She goes and gets in between the two of them. She puts her hands up on his chest. He pushes them down. And then she continues to stand in between them. And he's screaming loudly 10 times, Amber, get the fuck up. Amber, get the fuck up. Amber, get the fuck up. Loudly. Then his bodyguards hear this. They come in, they break it up. That's how that happens. But the next part of this, remember Josh Drew, and I think Elizabeth Mars was amazing in this one. Remember their testimony. After that, he goes and he has to, he always leaves a path of destruction as he's leaving. So he bashes up things, and you saw Ben's pictures here on the picture frames, knocks things over as he's going, goes down the hallway, he's splashing the wine, he gets his bodyguards to let him into penthouse 5. That's where Josh and Elizabeth are trying to help with Rocky's bead thing for the next day, and he comes in, storming in, and he says, get your bitch out of here, and he's got the big magnum, and he's mad, and Elizabeth is just terrified. She barely knows Johnny. She's met him 4 times, and she goes ripping out of there as fast as she can, and Josh gets out of there too. Then what does he do? He rearranges the furniture, or he might have knocked something off, one of the countertops or something. I think is the testimony
by her storytelling.
But you saw the pictures. He went through and trashed that place again as he left. Now, the next part of this is the police coming. Io calls the police. He's in New York. He calls the New York Police 911. He's afraid they're not going to get there fast enough. He still remembers December 15 because he came in afterwards and saw all of the injuries on Amber and all the evidence. And he's terrified that Amber's still in there, the police haven't come, and that Johnny's going to kill her. So he calls a friend in L.A. and says, please call 911. We got to get somebody there fast. So she calls 911. So we have 2 calls, and you'll see the call summary. And the call summary shows those 2 calls really close in proximity here. So it's not them, we didn't get the first police officer, so we'll rough up the place and make a second one. You'll see that they're like 8 minutes apart up there. But it took 2 hours to dispatch the 2 different ones, and Amber never even had any idea that the second one was coming. The first one's come. And, we've talked about it. We've shown you the pictures. The police officers admitted that those pictures could very much have been what was there that night. Remember, Officer Haddon, it was his first week on the job.
No.
Officer Science was three years on the job at that point. They say, you know, they told Josh that if she will press charges, if she'll give a name, we can file a report and make an arrest. She wouldn't do it. You did hear from Detective Sandanaga. That's the domestic violence.
Yeah, no, they said that it was just consistent to her crying. That's it. They didn't say that it was like that she had like injuries or bruises or whatever. They said that what they saw was consistent with her crying, and she just had like puffy eyes. That's about it. Elena's just going on in this whole rant. Oh my goodness, but it's actually really entertaining to watch, so I'm pretty amused by it as well.
You recall Josh Drew saying that the police officer told him, you know, she'll give a name, we'll make an arrest. He definitely said that. But in any event, she would not cooperate. She didn't want to. But Detective Sandanaga, their domestic relations or domestic violence person, said they should have done an incident report no matter what, even if they decided there wasn't a crime. Because domestic violence has the cycles, they come back. And it's good to have the record for the next time that it might happen. So she said they should have under the circumstances, even if they didn't. And she also said that when they put verbal dispute only in those calls, it is a code that they use, and you'll see that it's twice on that call report. So they to say that's why we didn't write a report. But in any event, whether the police officers, you know, forgot about it 2 months later when they were first asked about it, whether they just decided she's never going to press charges, and you'll see on the call report they're insisting that to the second set, it doesn't make any difference. The point is, this is still false. This statement is still false because Amber did everything but try to press charges against Johnny Depp. So they go away. And the testimony is that Josh and Amber and Rocky cleaned up because they have dogs, so they cleaned up a lot of the glass and the wine and those types. They had no idea the second police officers were coming by, and they certainly didn't call them, and they certainly didn't talk. They never talked to a publicist. She did talk to a lawyer who gave her advice, and that's why she wouldn't tell them, you know, anything. She said, "I'm not going to cooperate at all." So the second one's coming. You saw that. You've got the video cameras in there. And you see there's no effort by them to try to get now these officers to press charges against Johnny Depp. Just the opposite. Josh Drew doesn't want to even let him in the place. They come through quickly. Everything's fine. They wave. Everything's fine. Are they trying to press charges against Johnny? No. They're not trying to do anything. They're trying to get him out of there, which makes this statement 100% false. Was it made with malice? Absolutely. There's nobody that thinks that Amber tried to press charges that night. Johnny knew that. But the other thing that's very helpful and what you should look at is Defendants Exhibits 772 and 773. Because once again, the next day, Johnny apologizes to Amber. He says in 2 different text messages, that's 772 and 773, he says, "My profound apologies" in one of them, and "my apologies are eternal" in the other one. What is he apologizing for the next day on May 22nd if he didn't know that he did all of those things? And by the way, remember Isaac Baruch even remembers the wine in the hallway. None of the police officers remember the wine. And that's because they're busy and they got a zillion other things going, and they didn't remember this call 2 months later when they were asked about it. So that's the next one. So clearly, that's 100% false. Clearly, they knew it. Clearly, there's malice in making that statement. They're trying to suggest that she's manufacturing evidence with her friends to try to frame Mr. Depp. Nothing could be further from the truth on that one. And she did not want those police officers to press charges. Now, let's go to the third one. Oh, and let's talk about the makeup just for a moment while we're going to the third one. This makeup thing, fresh-faced, natural. These were Adam Waldman planting these when he talked to the ECB people. You know, remember the testimony here. We kept asking, so did you talk to Mr. Waldman? Did you talk to Mr. Waldman? Mr. Waldman was trying to plant in all of these people's minds.
Objection, Your Honor.
Somehow, she wasn't.
Did he approach?
Oh my God.
There were days where she didn't wear eye makeup. A lot of people think that she's not wearing makeup when she doesn't have mascara and eyeliner on. She has different looks, and some of them are with eye makeup and some of them are without. And people misunderstand, especially people that aren't that good at makeup, and a lot of men, frankly, go, oh, then she probably doesn't have makeup. And that's where that mistake happens. But you heard her testimony, and you heard her makeup artist testimony saying she doesn't go out of her room without concealer and foundation. She knows how to put these things in. And you saw Defendant's Exhibit 155, and you'll have the actual thing in there. That's the type of palette she used, and she was very adept at telling you what colors she puts on for the different days of bruises. This is a woman who for 4 years did everything she could to cover up anybody knowing anything about this abuse. Do you honestly think she's just going to walk around for the week with her bruises exposed? Of course she's not. Now, let's go to the third one. And this is the abuse hoax. He says, we've reached the beginning of the end of Ms. Heard's abuse hoax against Johnny Depp. Now, obviously the defamatory meaning of that is that Amber's creating an abuse hoax. But there is no abuse hoax. I don't need to tell you all of the evidence because Ben did a beautiful job of just taking you through all of those different things, but I will point out a couple things for you. And that is, remember Bonnie Jacobs, the therapist. Dr. Hughes and Dr. Spiegel testified about Bonnie Jacobs' notes. And remember that I was holding that, you don't get to see them, but they testified that they went through them. Dr. Hughes testified that she also spoke with Bonnie Jacobs. She kept contemporaneous notes from 2011 when she first started seeing Amber. And the abuse is documented in those notes, is what Dr. Hughes testified to. They start in 2012, both physical and sexual.
Objection, Your Honor.
That Dr. Hughes testified to that. Because of Bonnie Jacobs' notes, she realized for the first time that the abuse started much earlier than she even realized before. She always had thought that it had started in 2013. When she went back and saw Bonnie Jacobs' notes, she realized that it had started much earlier, and she was very embarrassed by that. Now, significantly, you remember that she testified about how she was first called upon to actually detail all of her events of abuse in February of this year. And she went through and took the notes, took photos, she took everything she had, calendars, everything, put it all together, and you heard about at least 64 pages of detailed accountability of that. And Mr. Depp's team has been able to not refute any of that. Remember, they tried to impeach her and say, well, you didn't say that. She said, yes, I did, on page 64. Remember that? It was a very, very difficult process for her because there was an awful lot of it, and she put it in great detail. Now, let's talk for a moment about the motive. They have said that she has created this whole hoax, and I think Ben's done a nice job of showing how that can't possibly have been. But what would Amber Heard's motive be for creating a hoax, or creating any of this, or making any of this up? That's a big question here. They call her a gold digger, right? But she obviously couldn't have done it for the money, because first of all, remember the testimony of Laura Wasser, the divorce attorney. She said that California is a no-fault state and community property. So Amber doesn't have to have an abuse. She could have divorced him for irreconcilable differences, for abandonment, for adultery, for anything. She doesn't need an excuse. And she gets 50% of whatever he earns during the time of the marriage, unless they had a prenup or a postnup. The testimony from Michelle Mulrooney was that Amber completely cooperated with the prenup and the postnup, but it was Johnny Depp who, and you've already heard from Ben, he called her up and fired her. He didn't want a post-nup or a prenup. So she's entitled to 50% of everything he earns during that time. Now, we have Plaintiff's Exhibit 936 in evidence. And look at page 69. It says how much he made in 2015. It was $43 million. Remember Mr. Spindler, Depp's expert, who said that he made $22 million in 2016. So you got $65 million. Amber was entitled to 31.5 at least. That doesn't include all the back ends from, for example, Pirates 5. She was entitled to that money. So she didn't need to say anything. She could have just said, I don't like you anymore. I don't like the color of your hair. I'm going to divorce you.
Your Honor, we're going to object again.
I don't know if they have shown this evidence during the court, but I know they can bring in new evidence. So I don't know if that's what the issue is.
So if you do the math, Amber is entitled to at least 31.5. What does she take? $7 million. What does she do with the $7 million? She gives it to charity, or she intends to give it to charity. Now, they make much ado about the pledge versus donation, but both the corporate designees for ACLU and for Children's Hospital said donation and pledge are interchangeable. You know, these are pledges. The ACLU corporate designee said you typically do pledges because of the tax benefits, and that's what she said. She pledged it over a period of time because of the tax implications to it and because she was getting paid over the time. Now, she started to make these donations, and you'll see that the first one was on behalf of Mr. Depp's business manager, Mr. White, actually sent the letters with the $100,000 for each of those. That was the initial ones. He was trying to take credit for those, and in fact, both the ACLU and Children's Hospital got confused and gave the credit to Mr. Depp, not to Amber, for those. Then she made payments to both, and Elon Musk also made payments to both for $500,000 each, which she didn't count to her pledge, but they helped those organizations. At the end of the day, she's made $1 million in payments to them, but then she got sued here and hasn't been able to because she spent $6 million in attorney's fees. That is unrefuted. She still intends to pay those pledges, honor those pledges, and she said that throughout, and I elicited from both the ACLU and from Children's Hospital, they haven't expired, she can pay them whenever she wants to, and she fully intends to, but she has to get out from under this first. Now, who would blame a woman for giving $1 million in charitable donations? Who would do that? That sounds like psychological abuse to me. Now, Mr. Mandel testified that Johnny Depp is not a charitable person, and he hasn't written any big checks for him. Mr. Depp got on the stand and says he does it anonymously, but Mr. Mandel would have been the one writing the checks, and he says that didn't happen. Now, let's go to damages, because I promised you I was going to go pretty fast here. There's a few different types of damages, but one of the things that the court has talked to you about, she told you that because we have defamation, it's invidious, and therefore it's very difficult to prove these. And so these damages to business reputation, inconvenience, embarrassment are presumed. You don't have to prove those damages. And one great example of that is the testimony from Mr. Hamada at Warner Brothers. He didn't want to have to get in the middle of all of this with Aquaman 2. They haven't even released it. So he didn't read anything in preparation for his deposition. He didn't talk to anybody before his deposition. He said that he tried to do technicals and say, no, we never terminated her contract, but oh yeah, we did tell her we were probably not going to renew her option. And then we didn't change the script, but Amber got the script, and yes, they did change it. Then he said, no, we never negotiate salaries, but oh yeah, we did renegotiate Jason Momoa's and Gal Gadot's. So he just doesn't want to admit to any of these things. But what came out in Hamada's deposition, and I hope you were listening carefully to this, was the email from James Wan, the director, and Jason Momoa, her co-star, who said they guarantee if they are in the film, she is going to be Mara in the film. Why would they do that unless they thought Warner Brothers was being unfair to her? And why did she get almost knocked out of it? Because of the defamatory statements. When they came out, they took on a life of their own. Ron Schnell, the young Sheldon, I call him, or the Doogie Howser, our expert on IT, took you through and tracked how they tracked the defamatory statements, the language from the defamatory statements, how that went through the social media and the negative social media. And it kept going and kept going. And he tracked all the way until a few months ago over 2.36 million negative tweets, negative Instagrams, negative social media's comments about Amber that relate specifically to the information that was in those 3 defamatory statements. It took on a life of its own. They started to get Amber fired from Aquaman 2. They have continued to this day. They have followed her everywhere. Everybody has stopped wanting her. L'Oreal won't use her, even though they've kept her on from that time. She lost 3 different opportunities that were being discussed with her. The most significant part of that, though, is that Aquaman was the biggest blockbuster ever for DC Films. It was the biggest. It was over $1 billion. This was her opportunity for her star. Even the experts from Mr. Depp admitted this was her blockbuster. This was her mega. But what happened instead? As she's going through, as it's coming out, and in that 16 months they were going, well, nothing happened. Yeah, lots happened. She had 3 different films she was discussing. She got the L'Oreal contract. She got The Stand. All of those things were happening because of Aquaman. And then everything shut down. She wasn't allowed to do publicity for The Stand. She wasn't allowed to, she hasn't been allowed to do anything for L'Oreal. She got shut down from her charitable organizations. She ended up not getting the Amazon movie. And then they gave her a hard time about Aquaman 2. And instead of the career trajectory of the other comparators, who all went way up, and by the way, all the experts admit that career trajectory went well for all the rest of them, and she's the only one that didn't have it. And the reason is because of the defamatory statements. So you have some very good information to help you on ascertaining those damages. Now, Jessica Kovacevic, and I don't know if you remember her, but she was her agent. She said, everybody just stop talking. The producers don't want her, the directors don't want her, nobody wants her. We just can't get the traction, and we should have been able to get the traction, and they say it's because of those statements. So Catherine Arnold gave you some good estimates on this, and she gave you a very good basis for it. And she didn't use Jason Momoa's or Gal Gadot's or the others. She used Amber's, but used those comparators to show that they got big movies, that they got commercial opportunities, that they got these TV opportunities. But she used the base that Amber had. So she used the $4 million from the Aquaman, that would be 3. She used the stands, how much they got paid per movie.
These have already been refuted by the Q scores.
Details is that if you took that for the last 2 years and projected into the next 3 to 4, that it's between $47 and $50 million that she could have had, instead of her star being completely extinguished. And that's what's happened to her. The emotional distress damages are even more extreme here. And that is, Don Hughes testified extensively about the PTSD and what she goes through. And every time she's called a liar, every time these hoax things come up, everything, it causes her to relive all of it. She talks about the panic attacks, the nervousness, the intrusive thoughts, the nightmares, all of the sweats, the anxiety that goes through all of this. It's significant, but probably the most compelling testimony that you could ever hear was from Amber yesterday and when she took the stand before. It has destroyed her life. This has consumed her. She's getting death threats. Her daughter, they're threatening to put her daughter in a microwave, for God's sake. She can't get away from this. It's everywhere.
Oh my God.
I'm
not laughing at what she said. I'm just like...
has just consumed her life. As she said, I'm a human being. No human being should be put through this. Now, Johnny Depp sued for $100 million, or for $50 million. And we sent a message back saying, fine, then we're going to sue for $100 million because look at what you've done to her. We're not asking you to give $100 million. We're asking you to just look at the damages in this case and just be fair and reasonable in whatever you determine by following the evidence and the instructions. But we do ask that you fully and fairly compensate Amber for everything that she's been through, both in terms of reputation and emotional distress. The very last point is punitive damages, and you surely have those in this case. We've asked for $350,000 for the punitive damages, and we would ask that you award that. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, what I'm going to do, we still have rebuttal closing arguments, but I can guarantee you that the rebuttal closing arguments will be done combined within 45 minutes. But what I want to do is go ahead and let you have your lunch. And then after lunch, we'll come back in the courtroom, have the rebuttal closing arguments, and then we'll submit the case to you, okay? All right, so go ahead and have your lunch. Do not discuss the case with each other and do not do any outside research, okay?
I love Elena's enthusiasm.